What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another episode of Under the Radar. And this week, we're taking a look at albums that came out on August 26th that I didn't do a review for, and there are quite a few. We got, I think, 6 albums. 6 fucking albums to talk about for this week. 2 of them being big ones, 4 of them being underground ones. And we're going to start off with one of the 2 big ones, and that is the latest offering from Japanese avant-garde, black metal, whatever you want to call them, Sigh, with their album, oh god, I'm going to have to pronounce this, Shiki. I think I said it right, Shiki. So, yeah, Sigh, band that's been around for a long time, out of Japan, and were amongst the earliest bands that was a part of the second wave of black metal that was outside of Norway, as their first album, Scorn Defeat, was on Death Like Silence Productions run by Euronymous and were discovered by Euronymous. But over the years, they have substantially evolved into more of an avant-garde metal band with elements of black metal, but also some prog, some thrash, maybe a little bit of doom, a little bit of death metal, all into one big melting pot. And then with this album, they had Lassie from doing the production, at least the mastering and the mixing, who did Ailstorm as well as Seor earlier this year. So good choice for the mixing and mastering side of things, as this album sounds massive and it sounds so good. Also, a couple of guest musicians doing all the tracks. You have Frederick Leclerc from Creator on guitars, and then Mike Heller from Fear Factory and Malignancy on drums, and both of those guys do an amazing job matching up to everybody else in the band. And man, people were not lying when they said that this album would be fucking bizarre, because there are a lot of bizarre things going on with this album. Of course, all the song titles and the lyrics are in Japanese, so I'm not going to try and torture you guys with my butchering of the Japanese language. But all I'm going to say is, just think with this album, there's a lot of, or not a lot, but there's, like I said, pretty much everything you come to expect from Sigh. The doom, the prog, the avant-garde, the black metal, some death metal, and the drum work from Mike Heller is a shining moment on here. Frederick's guitar work is great on here as well. There was even one track on here, and I can't remember offhand. I think it was Fugu ga Kuru, that almost had a bit of a Dream Theater vibe to it, which was really cool. So definitely bringing out that prog influence into their sound. But some people might think this shouldn't work. All the different elements and like the weird like horror ambience that you get here from time to time. But I'm here to tell you right now, it fucking works. And this is a hell of an album. Great riff writing, great drum work, crazy vocals, and all kinds of like folk instrumentation, symphonic instrumentation. This is a 9.5 out of 10. I can see why a lot of people were in love with this album when it came out the other day, and I can understand it. This is a fantastic album. Probably will pick this one up because it's just wacky and weird, but it's awesome. Well, hell has officially frozen over for this next album that I'm talking about for Under the Radar this week. And the reason why I may say that is because, well, I never, ever thought I would talk about anything nice about this band ever again. But we're going to talk about the new Machine Head album of Kingdom and Crown.
The end is nigh! The end is nigh! F***ing run away! The end is nigh!
So for those uninitiated, long-time subscribers and friends of mine will know that the last time that I checked out anything Machine Head, it was their last album, Catharsis, 4.5 years ago, and I ranted and raved about it and how much I hate that album, still hate that album to this day, and how I feel Rob Flynn is a conceited bastard. While I still do not like Rob Flynn really at all, I have to give the devil its due that this album actually was good. I mean, to be honest, If they would have just written a play by number, or not play by numbers, paint by numbers album, that would have been okay, because Catharsis was such a fucking abomination disaster. I can go on and on about it if I want to, but I don't want to talk your ears off about it. Let's talk about this new album. So this album had been recorded for pretty much over 2 years, and it's finally seen the light of day, and of course, a lot has changed with Machine Head since the abomination that was Catharsis. Phil Dimmel left to go back to Violence. In walks Vogue from Decapitated, in which I talked about the new Decapitated album earlier this year, and that was a fantastic album. So I was kind of worried that Vogue was going to be wasted in Machine Head, because I'll just go ahead and say Decapitated is a much better band than Machine Head, but I digress. So I was worried Vogue was going to get lost in the shuffle, kind of like how I feel Jeff Loomis has been lost in the shuffle with Arch Enemy lately. But when I listen to this album, the leads on this album are fucking fantastic, and most of them done by Vogue himself, where he's just going chaotic, but yet still being cohesive and having feeling and melody and technical execution. Rob's leads are great too, even though I don't like Rob Flynn to save my own life. And this is a concept album all about two people who lost their loved ones and go on killing sprees. And the first half of this album was actually really, really strong. You know, Slaughter to Martyr, all the way through Unhallowed. I thought all those songs were really damn good. Then the second half of the album is where it really kind of fell off for me. Like, there was quite a few songs in the second half that I just thought, ugh, like Kill Thy Enemies, No Gods, No Masters, Bloodshot, and Rotten. Those songs didn't really do that much for me. And also, lyrically, I'm like, Rob, can you write better lyrics for these songs? But thankfully, the closer, Arrows in Words from the Sky, saved the second half. And then, how the hell do you pronounce this? Extoroception, which was the instrumental, and that was maybe my favorite song because it felt like a death metal song done by Machine Head. So, while the first half was really strong, second half definitely made this album fall in the score quite a bit. And this is not just me being biased against the band. I would wish Rob Flynn would quit being conceited and crying all the time about stupid shit. But I have to give the devil its due. This album is solid. It's a good album. But really, the songs to really go for this album are the first half from the beginning through Unhallowed, and the final two tracks, Arrows from Words from the Sky, and the instrumental. So for that, I give this album a 7.5 out of 10. Yeah, some of the songs felt like they were playing it safe a little bit, but most of the songs, they were definitely being creative and showcasing technicality, and it's fucking heavy as balls. So, there you go. I have to give the devil its due. This was a solid album. Ugh, I still hate Rob Flynn, though. Next album we're talking about for this episode is a debut album from a Tampa-based progressive metal band called Aperion Bound with Multiplicity. So, I was curious to hear about this one, considering it's listed as progressive metal, and I do like prog quite a bit. And this was a debut from a band, and really the only thing noteworthy about this band in terms of the members is their guitarist Kyle used to be the bass player for the cult death metal band Disincarnate back in the 90s. So, fun little fact for you guys. But yeah, this album, it's long. It's 65 plus minutes long, but it's prog metal, so you're bound to get long albums in this genre. And this one, really, like, it's packed full of a bunch of stuff. It's 12 songs, but with a few, like, soundscape tracks here and there in between, like, the longer tracks. And I feel like some of those soundscape tracks could have just been slapped on to the long songs and it would have fit just fine. It didn't need to be its own track, but that's just me. But I like how, with this album, it's able to mix the structures of prog rock with elements of extreme metal. Like, there's some death metal going on here, maybe even a little hint of black metal at times, but there's some, like, elements of electronic music, classical music, fusion, because there's even some saxophone bits on here, too. And there's some really cool riffs, great rhythms, some beautifully crafted guitar leads on here, and even the vocal performance, like the vocals just go all over the place, from low notes to high notes to growls to screams. It's just craziness all throughout, I will say. And like the production, yeah, some people might think it might sound too clean once they listen to it, but it works with this genre. You want it to sound as good as possible, so that way you can hear every little detail that's going on within the confines of the music. And also that this album's a bit of a concept involving stuff like exploring the human condition, as well as being like an escape from political climates, or the political climate, as well as like narcissism and all sorts of stuff. And it's like a lyrical story is what this album's all about. So while some of the stuff could have been trimmed down a little bit, like trimmed the fat on a couple of tracks, overall I thought this was a pretty good debut. I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Definitely showcases a lot of potential for this band, and if they have another album, I bet you it'll probably blow this one out of the water. But great potential for an upcoming band, and we'll see where they go from here. Next album, and we're on a different day and a new shirt. First time I've done done this on a Under the Radar, where it's on a different day, a different time, different shirt, but circumstances get in the way, of course. But the fourth album we're talking about, from August 26th, is the second full-length from Intent with their album Exile. This is an Arizona-based thrash metal band, and this is their second album, and because you know me, I love my thrash, so I wanted to check this one out, and kind of in a similar case to bands like Defacatory and Flames, I was not expecting much out of this album, considering it was my first time checking out, so I was like, okay, this should be some high-impact stuff, and it was high impact and then some. Like, this album is brutal, it's fast, it's aggressive, basically everything I love about thrash. And what's interesting with this album is, because I'm a big fan of the band Evil, of course, you know, either iteration, their early work or their most recent output with Hell Unleashed, this band almost sounds like they took the early career of Evil and where they're at now and mashed it together into one album, which is really cool, because vocally, it sounds like Matt Drake if he had a bit more of a hardcore bite, because there are times on this album where the vocalist also sounds a little bit like Jamie Josta from Hatebreed, so there are times where he's like mixing the two, but it's mostly sounds like Matt Drake from Evil in the vocal delivery and style. Like, it's almost mirror to what Matt Drake did back when he was in Evil, but musically, there's a lot of Slayer going on in here. There's even some like Demolition Hammer, some modern day Testament thrown into the mix. It's evil sounding too, like it's evil, brutal, aggressive. I absolutely love this album. Production wise, I do feel the vocals and the guitars do get a little bit buried by the drums. Like, the drums are super punchy on this album, which I love. I only wish the guitars, the bass, and the vocals could have been on the same volume level as the drums, and I think this album would have been even more over the top than it already is. I'm giving this one a 9.5 out of 10. This is some fantastic modern thrash from a new band, and this is only their second album, first one in 8 years, and I was blown away at the brutality that this album had to offer. Nothing more, nothing less to be said other than check it out. Next album I'm talking about is, we're getting death metal on this next one. We're talking about the latest album from Consumption, Necrotic Lust. So this is the second album from this Swedish death metal band, and got into one to check this one out, not just because I found it on Metal Archives, but also found out that this band is 2/3 of the band Defactory, who I talked about briefly when talking about the Intent album. So when I saw that it's 2 members of Defactory, and that album from theirs that came out this year was fucking outstanding, I figured this one might be just as good. And, well, this album, Necrotic Lust by Consumption, feels like almost like a sampler platter of all things death metal. Like, you get pretty much almost every facet of death metal on this album. You get some blackened tremolos at times, you get some doomy foot stomping stuff, some groovy, like, classic death metal. Some of, like, the old school Swedish death metal influence gets a little bit brutal at times, gets thrashy at times. It's, like, all-encompassing, like, death metal for the most part. It's not really as technical as, like, tech death or so, but I really enjoyed this one. And also, they even got Jeff Walker from Carcass to do a guest vocal spot. Well, actually shared vocal duties on one track, and that one, I forget the name of it off the top of my head. Ground into Ash and Coal, that's what it was. That was probably my favorite track of the album, not just because of Jeff being in there, but the songwriting was great. So, now, when I was thinking, okay, this is a Swedish death metal band, I was expecting maybe some of that, like, HM2 worship. Not really. This was like a tone of its own, it felt like. Not really a HM2 style, or if it was, it had to have been mixed with like another pedal or something, because definitely didn't quite sound like a typical Swedish death metal album, tone-wise. But overall, I thought this was a really good album, though I still think that the Defactory album beats this one quite a bit. This is still a very good album, 9 out of 10 for Consumption Necrotic Lust. This is another one that I'm thinking about picking up. This is some really solid meat and potatoes, death metal sampler platter. It's really, really good. And then for the final album we're talking about for Under the Radar this week is the second full-length release from Greek thrashers Amken, or Aimkin, whichever it is, in their new album Passive Aggression. So this is another thrash band that's up and coming that I hadn't heard of until now, and I had already seen, like, while I was listening to this album, I'd seen people say this is like old school thrash done right, and I'm like, well, I'll be the judge of that. But I will say, this album kicks some serious ass right here, too, because, again, it's sort of like a melting pot of, like, all kinds of thrash. You get a little bit of the Bay Area influence of Metallica riffs here and there, and, like, Testament moments, even a little bit of Exodus. You also get some German thrash influence in here, especially, like, middle-era Sodom, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, like Code Red and M16 era in particular. I think I get hints of that on this album. But there's also a lot of Sepultura influence on here. And I'm talking old Sepultura, like Schizophrenia and Beneath the Remains, Arise, like that time frame of Sepultura. And even towards the end, like especially in the final song, you get some like latter era death elements, like from Symbolic and Sound of Perseverance in there. So it's like this band's just taking all their influences, mashing them into one big melting pot, and creating something of their own, which is really, really cool. Also, I like how the production, everything was even kiltered. The vocals were in your face and powerful. And even in like the guitar work, there are some brutal riffs, but there are also some really cool melodies on here too. And they also like how they vary the tempos for the most part. Like they go from like a mid-tempo, like almost bluesy groove into like blast beats even on a couple of tracks. And of course the typical Slayer beat laced all throughout this album. For a young band, this is another great one. I don't think it was quite as good, in my opinion, as the Intent Exile album, but it's still a great album. I give this one a 9 out of 10, and this is probably going to be another one I'm going to pick up in the collection at some point, if my brain can remember to buy some stuff off of Bandcamp here before the end of the year. That would be really, really cool. But yeah, 9 out of 10 for Amken, Passive Aggression. And that does it for this week's episode of Under the Radar. Man, there was a lot to talk about here. Next week is going to be a little bit lighter because, well, we got Megadeth coming out and then 2 other ones that I got my eye on. But the 9th, oh my god, the 9th is going to be loaded with stuff. So be on the lookout for all that stuff. But thank you guys for watching. Horns high. See you guys soon.
Said Michael was the wait. How was Charles
I was trying
alive
to
again?
shoot Michael.
I brought him back.
Oh.
Wait, I'm sorry, what? Huh?
Seth,
I didn't even know I was alive!
You brought him back as an innocent person? He's dead. I thought he was dead.
Damn it! Yes, everybody.
What happened?
Okay, what happened? Okay, let me explain.
Why would Charles survive?
Hold on, let me explain. So, Charles was shooting at me, I killed him, and I bought the defibrillator, and I brought him back, but Seth killed him!
Again?
Seth killed him, and then I killed Seth!
Well, to be fair,